Hi everyone, welcome back to another development update on Kwyll. It'll be a fairly short one this time because a lot of things have been going on, but most of them aren't visible or not immediately visible. Um, but I'll go through some of the small tweaks and changes I've been making. The reason there's not a lot to see is because a lot of the work I've been doing is behind the scenes on preparing the tool chain capabilities, making sure that it works across multiple platforms in order to get it out into people's hands for testing, early alpha testing. I wanted to make sure that I covered as many OSs and platforms as possible within limitations of what I can achieve at the moment. So a lot of the work had to be done once I started moving to things like Windows. I noticed that the way that Godot, in particular when rendering lots of UI stuff, non-gaming applications, has some nuances that need to be taken into account. Specifically, I found on certain Windows machines that don't support high DPI or don't communicate high DPI in the same way that the Mac screens I've been working on do. The whole screen resolution and the size of the controls all became a little bit weird. So I've done a lot of work to go back and refactor the way that the UI works. Hopefully, haven't lost anything in the process. It should be fairly similar, but gives me a lot more control over how it works across different platforms now. So, without further ado, let's just go into the editor very quickly, and I'll show some of the changes. So, as you can see, not a lot changed. Some of the sizes of the controls have been modified. Still not entirely sure that I'm happy with them as they are. May go a little bit smaller, but I don't want to go too small and make it difficult to use. So it's going to be a balancing act. But that's what it looks like at the moment, and hopefully, fingers crossed, as far as I can tell, it looks similar or the same on Windows as well. So hopefully people can start using it on Windows. A couple of things, we've got a new icon up here. This is just information. Settings doesn't work yet at the moment. That's a feature to be done. But the information was because I've introduced a new dialog that will by default pop up excuse me, the first time you install and use the app. And the reason for that is I didn't want to include the examples in the zip. Number of different reasons. Firstly, the Godot export process makes that a little bit of a pain. It's much easier just to export a DMG on macOS or a zip or XC on Windows and not have to worry about injecting other files into the zip later. So to avoid that, I've moved the examples out into a separate archive that's hosted on a public project on GitHub, so they can be downloaded. And when you start up for the first time, it will just give you this very simple welcome dialog. This will change. This will add more detail in here as and when. At the moment, it's just got a link to the downloads. We click on this, it'll open up in your browser a link to the download place for the releases on GitHub, and from there you can download a simple zip that just contains the single sample project at the moment, but will grow to include additional samples and and references and so on as we go. And I imagine this will change. This dialog will change to include links to documentation and various other bits and pieces. It does show the live version number, so this will change. So this is a good reference when reporting issues and so on to use this to tell me which version of the tool you're using. And you can turn it off. So if you click on this, it won't show next time you start the editor. That's a very simple small change. As I say, most of this should be fairly consistent now. All of the dialogues use a common, or all of the tabs, use a common styling and layout and theme, so that it should be fairly consistent across. And as I say, most importantly, should now work across different screen types. I'll come into what I'll get into a little bit more detail about what I've changed on the preview in a moment. Most of it, I think I'm going to need to load something up in order to. There you go, the standard test. So a couple of things changed on the sprite editor. I've muted the checkerboard background to make the sprite itself stand out a little bit more, so you can see where the masking is. I found it a little bit difficult because it was very bright before. These two colours were very bright, which made it very difficult to pick out the sprite against the transparent background. So now hopefully that should be a little bit clearer. Other than that, I don't think there's much else visually that you can see. The other changes I've implemented are, actually let's go and look at the preview very quickly and I'll show you what this does. So before, if you remember in the previous video, this just printed some text out just for debugging purposes. It's a little bit more functional now, so it'll actually show an interactive tree of global and local objects. I'm planning to add dynamic objects, but it's not there yet. So you can see, for example, the player. You can see the player's position. A more interesting one would be the local object, the bubble, which you can see these position values are updating as it moves, as well as any variables that are on the logic. So this is being updated by the logic and will be constantly updated in this display. So it gives you a little bit of information about what's going on, helps you to debug. And if you remember in the player, as you move around, you've got these various variables that get set and reset by the logic. That all happens dynamically now, so you can see DIR and facing and did shoot I'll get to in a moment. So that's the preview changes. And the other thing internally in the actual editor, the other things that have changed are around logic. So I've made a few changes to the logic, in particular adding new capabilities. So one of the people that I've got testing it came up with some ideas that just it couldn't do at that particular time, so I decided to put some new logic capabilities in to support that this feature that he wanted. So basically, before these changes, this is on the bubble, so the bubble moving up and down. This was the entirety of the move part. It just gets the start X, puts that into the X, and gets this variable which is updated up here based on whether you're moving up and down, and moves the object. So all of this new stuff here is in support of this new feature, which allows you to respond to different types of collisions. So the collisions was very simple in the previous examples. I don't even think this was connected properly or wasn't operational. So now you've got, coming out of an object, a move object node, if there's a collision, this path will be followed. If there's no collision, this path, in fact I think this path will be followed irrespective, but this path will only be followed if there is a collision. And this output port holds the reference to the object that was collided with, so what the bubble has hit. So I've got a couple in here, and I've added this new node type, is type, and this was important because at runtime you need to identify which object type you've hit in order to behave or change the behavior of the collision. So now it tests is type can test the type of any object. If you don't connect up the ref, it does the type of this object, which doesn't make a lot of sense because you know what this object is, but its primary purpose is to test whether an object being passed in from elsewhere in the logic tree is of a particular type and behave accordingly. So this is checking whether the bubble has collided with the player, and if it has, then it will follow this path, which is basically to flip the direction. This is what the person who was testing wanted to try and do. So basically it just gets the variable, inverts it, multiply -1, and then puts it back into the direction again. So basically what this will do is, instead of following its full route top to bottom as it always has in the past, if it hits the player, it will reverse and go back up to the top or to the bottom depending on where it's hit. If it's false, if it hasn't hit the player, or if it isn't a player that it's collided with, then it checks to see if it's a bullet, and if it is, then it sets the direction to 0, basically stopping it. And because all of the logic up here is tied to the direction being either -1 or 1, if you set it to 0, it will just literally stop all animation, and the bubble will stop. So those are the things. There's a few other changes in here behind the scenes, enabling some features that weren't there, but that's the majority of it. Is these new is type node. and adding some more to the collision. And I think on the player we've got some more information in here. I think this wasn't in the last video, forgive me if it was, but again, looking at the way that handling of dynamic objects and these blue reference links work. When you spawn an object now, this will contain the reference to the object that was spawned. So now we can do directional shooting. I've got a funny feeling I did cover this in the last video, so I won't go into too much detail. I'll come back to it if I realise I haven't. And I think that's basically it. So if we go back to the preview now and run, and if I just, first of all, I'll show you the changes to the bubble, and if I get in its way, it'll just change direction. And similarly, if I get in its way from the top, it just flips as soon as it hits. So it can detect that the bubble has hit the player and change direction, and also it'll detect if it's hit by a bullet and stop. So we're detecting across local, global and dynamic objects now, collision detection, and the logic on each object is able to respond differently depending on the type of object. I've just remembered the other change. I knew there were some other changes in the logic that came into play, and it turned out that I didn't need new nodes to do this. I just need to find it. There it is. So I was trying to think about how to do keyboard debouncing. So if you remember in the previous videos, if I tapped the space bar, it fired off 5 bullets very quickly, which obviously didn't want to do particularly. So I've just introduced a very simple debounce in the code rather than in the logic, rather than actually forcing it in code. So basically what it does, I've introduced a new variable, did shoot, which when the jump or fire button is pressed and it's true, it will set did shoot. So if did shoot is 0, then it will spawn a bullet and set its direction according to which way you're facing, as it always has done, and then finally it will set did shoot to 1. So this will now contain did shoot, as in you've pushed the space bar and you fired a bullet, and then while that variable is 1, it won't allow you to shoot again. So then what happens is, next time round the logic, next frame, if you've released the fire button, or at any point in the future when you release the fire button, this false path will be followed because the fire button isn't pressed, and that just sets the did shoot variable back to 0, which means next time round you're able to shoot again. And I just remembered there was one other change to the logic that was required. Looking back at the previous videos, you'll have seen that the bullets, when they go off screen, disappear, or they get removed, and there's a count in the top corner on the Spectrum emulator that shows how many dynamic objects are actually still active. So you can see that as they go off screen, the bullets disappear and are removed from the system. Now that was happening, that was hard coded into the game harness and into the simulator as a very specific thing. If a dynamic object moved off screen, in fact if it moved off screen to the right only, coincidentally it deleted it. So when I introduced the ability to shoot in both directions, that caused a problem, because bullets that were shot off the screen to the left never disappeared. They just went round the world and came back around after a few seconds, quite a few seconds, and then reappeared. So rather than fix that up as a hard-coded feature in the engine, which doesn't make a lot of sense, I decided to add some features to the logic that enables me to do that properly, so that we can see in the bullet. So the new nodes that have been added are is on screen and kill object. So these are only used in here. So basically it will check to see whether the object itself is on screen, is it within the visible part of the screen, on the current room, and there's a true and false path. So if it's true, in this case for the bullet, if it's true, then just carry on, everything's fine. And in this case, if it's false, i.e. it's moved off screen, then kill the object. And kill object will only work on dynamic objects. If you do a kill object on a global or a local object, it won't work because they're fixed in the system. They're part of the game. So this will only work if it's a dynamic object. And like all of the object ones, they all take references, so you can check if another object is on or off screen. So in response to a collision or some other event that results in an object reference being provided, the is on screen node can be used to check whether that object is on screen and change how it behaves based on that. And similarly with the kill object, so you can kill other objects as long as you have a valid reference to it and it is a dynamic object. So I think that's it now. That is all of the new features. Let me just double check before I stop this time. Yes, I think that's it. So again, getting back to the preview so we can see it in action, if I push and hold space, it only fires a single bullet, and did shoot is set to 1 until I release it. As soon as I release it, I can shoot again. So it's very simple debouncing and allows you to shoot a little bit more controlled. Just very quickly to show that the logic on the bubbles follows through independent of which use of the object is in play. So you can shoot the bubble there and it'll stop, and similarly if I get in the way of this bubble, it'll bounce around, change its direction. So that's the changes to the logic. And just very quickly to show that this translates to the runtime on the Spectrum, I'll do a quick export. I say quick, I'll do an export, and as usual I'll speed past this in post, so you don't have to sit through the build. All done. So just quickly check, yes, it got through to the app make, which means there were no compile errors, which is good. So now if we switch to our emulator and load that up, we should see that all the changes are implemented in the C harness as well. So if we get in the way of the bubble, it should change direction in both directions, and if we shoot the bubble, it stops. And the debounce works here as well, so you've got much more control over shooting. So that's the changes this time round in terms of the actual tool and the creation part. As I said, the other changes that I've done have been largely about preparing for deployment for early alpha testers. So I've now got a toolchain build for Windows, Intel, macOS, Apple Silicon, and macOS Intel, and this download button will choose the correct one according to the platform you're on, as far as I've been able to test. And the engine itself, the tool itself, runs perfectly okay on Windows and macOS. So I've got a couple of people who have expressed an interest in doing some early alpha testing from either the forum or from the Coffee subscribers list. If anyone else is interested, do pop a message into the comments here or pop onto Coffee and drop me a line there and let me know what platform you're on and what version of the what OS and what chipset, what CPU type you have, and I'll add you to the list, and as soon as we're ready to go, which will be very shortly now, I'll start sending out some links to early alpha testing for people to give some feedback. As usual, if you enjoy this, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.